Rebellions are built on hope.
All right, this is Tatooine Sons, the only fan podcast to name a canon Star Wars creature and to be endorsed by the writer and the director of The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson.
The best Star Wars movie.
How you guys doing?
Hey.
Doing good.
I'm here.
So I was having a conversation today with the head of advertising for an independent studio.
Okay.
An agency that works with a bunch of independent studios. And he's like, so I checked you out before this meeting. He says, my brother is a huge Star Wars fan.
Okay.
He says he listens to Tatooine Sons. You got his endorsement.
Oh, wow.
Before we have this meeting. I was like,
That's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. And then Denver Broncos media insider goes to all the training camp stuff, does a daily podcast about the Broncos, all of that, like in the locker room kind of guy for the Broncos. I was replying to one of his tweets today about the Broncos, and he's like, by the way, I listen to your guys' podcast all the time. It's really awesome.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
It was a crazy day.
That is kind of wild.
It's kind of cool. We're going to change things up a little bit.
Okay.
Just a little bit.
So we've been doing a lot of, kind of reaction to movies, reaction to TV series. That's kind of the way the show's been from the beginning. We're going to try something different.
Okay.
BB Nate's going to be excited about this one.
I am.
So we're going to do an 8-episode series.
Okay.
Looking at everything surrounding DC Comics Kingdom Come series from 1996.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's a good series.
It is a good series. I've actually read the whole thing, which is rare for me.
It's only 4 issues.
It's also
it's a
250
pretty long
pages.
book.
It's about 250 pages of comics.
They're big
thick issues because it was released in a format of Elseworlds, which usually
we'll talk
had
about
longer
issues. So this week we're going to talk about the Genesis,
which is
that a reference to the,
might as well, right? There's a very biblical storyline.
It all follows Revelation,
right? So we'll start with Genesis, and then we'll do that after this little message from one of our friends over at the Christian Nerd HQ. This is Tatooine Sons.
We are the Reverend and the Reprobate, just two best buds interviewing people we have no business talking to. I'm Lucas Pinkard.
I'm Dan Gibson. These aren't tears on my face.
Every Thursday, we interview somebody else from our favorite fandoms and yours. You can check those interviews out on the Christian Nerd HQ network. You can find us on YouTube at RevRep Podcast at ReverendRep.com. And if you can't remember our name, just go to BaconOffice.com. It's way easier to find new episodes every Thursday. Thank you guys for supporting Christian Nerd HQ, and check out the Reverend and the Reprobate.
It's true. All of it.
What is the name of the porg on the Millennium Falcon?
Force is strong in my family.
What do you think his name is? It's a big moment.
I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Maybe Turbis?
Do or do not. There is no try.
Turbis? Pablo, if you're listening to this live stream, that porg's name is now Turbis. It's a good Star Wars name.
We're not done yet.
These guys recorded an awesome podcast called Tatooine Sons. Everybody listen to it.
He is.
I don't know why.
Why did you think? Why do you think?
I just kind of pictured him as being like an older guy. Maybe it's because of his kind of older style.
So how old do you think he is? Like really,
now?
like legitimately, he is.
Like currently?
Yeah.
I would say 40s or so.
Well, that's just probably not even possible because he wrote this and he was already an established artist in 1996. So he's got to be in his 50s or beyond. So
yeah, but I expected him to be older than even that.
Okay.
So
is that?
But Jim Lee's not that old. He did comics in the 90s.
That's true.
That's true.
But Jim Lee is not young either.
No, he's not.
So
how old's Jim Lee now?
He's about the same as Alex Ross.
Anyway,
welcome to Tatooine Sons, a pop culture podcast. We believe that pop culture is the mythology of this generation. That there is a story. It is written on our souls, and that these myths speak to that story, and that is why we're beginning a new 8-episode series this week on DC Comics Kingdom Come, all the way, like I said, from 1996.
Nice.
So,
I was not alive. I was about -5 years old.
1996 was the year I met your mother.
Wow,
that's wild.
And let's
Kingdom
just
Come
like
Chaos, so that's
pivot
pretty
this in.
good.
Let's pivot this entire series and just do a How I Met Your Mother
Tatooine Sons edition.
edition of that. Maybe not.
So it only took y'all a year from when you met to get married.
I told her I was marrying her on our second date.
It's not a very long
seriously turning into
series.
How I Met Your Mother was good.
We were engaged in 4 weeks. So, we a little tip, our little nugget of trivia. I was asking your mother to marry us when the Centennial Park Olympic bombing was taking place.
Wow.
Wow, that's a weird piece
It
of
literally
trivia.
was happening in the moment that I was asking your mother. It was explosive. So, yeah.
Okay.
Anyway. All right, Sam. So, Kingdom
Yikes.
Come. Yeah, you've
Yes.
read it.
I have actually.
But what are your
I think I read it this year.
What are your general
So-
thoughts on this series?
It well surpassed any like expectations or thoughts I had going into it. I just heard, from Nathan that he loves the series, and I think Pastor Stewart said that it's his favorite. And
Lucas was talking to you about it just this week.
Great.
Lucas from Reverend and the Reprobate, right, Sam or Nate?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just everyone talked about how great it was and how it followed a pastor and not like superheroes. I'm like, okay, it's interesting, but the complex story and the different look that we get at the characters and what a possible future could be, coupled with a biblical narrative that was executed really, really well. It wasn't heavy handed or anything. Made for a really like impactful story. Plus, I don't think this is. We probably mentioned this before, but Nate and I will both probably say that Alex Ross is our favorite comic artist.
Really?
He's
As far as
inspired a
art
lot of
goes?
stuff. Mhm.
He's a phenomenal artist. So
We'll talk
having
about him for sure.
A whole series where he does not just the cover art but the interior art too had an effect, I think.
That's why. And you said this was within the last 12, 18 months. You guys have read
Yeah,
it?
it might have been this calendar year, 2023, that I read it. I don't remember it like too detailed from my reading. Of
I
it,
think
but-
as we talked about it.
Yeah, I definitely think it'll come back. Well,
Now, Nate,
yeah,
you
I
just
wonder
read
why.
it again today.
I did.
But
All
originally,
250 pages.
All of it.
but you originally read this like very early on in your comics
Very.
experience. How old do you think you were when you originally read it?
Maybe 13 or 14.
Okay, so it was
this is very
4 or 5 years ago.
very heavy to read at that age. It's difficult to understand. It was even slightly difficult for me to understand now, but I was able to get it and understand it all, which was good. It's much better now that I've reread it.
But you liked it before.
I did like it before, but I like it even more now because I thought before, I'm like, this is just a really cool superhero story. I'm like, no, this is just an influential, really amazing, well-told story with art that surpasses some of what we have today.
Oh, yeah.
And has inspired generations of artists like Lee Bermejo and a bunch of other hyper realistic artists that we have now. It's been amazing.
Well, it's going to be fun to talk about it. Sam, what do you, we've talked a little bit about what the plan for this episode or this series is with this going forward. What can listeners expect from a podcast series about Kingdom Come? What are some of the things that we'll discuss?
Well, today we're talking about certain themes and concepts that are discussed within the series, and then
And the history of
the history
the origin
and kind of the things surrounding the story, and then eventually we'll kind of dive in a little bit more on the specific narrative itself, talking about that, breaking down some of the characters and things like that. Just kind of giving it each episode, kind of taking a more detailed look at something else in the series, and of course with this series having a lot of biblical tie-ins to it. You can expect us to throw in our own
classic Tatooine Sons. take.
classic Tatooine Sons look into this story. So it's like the perfect starting point for us for this new series.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fun to do this. Now, Nate, you're as everyone that listens to us normally knows, you're the resident comic book super nerd in this group. So, what is the significance of Kingdom Come within the larger DC universe, from your understanding?
It's difficult to explain because it doesn't have much influence into the larger DC continuity due to the fact it being an Elseworlds story.
So, for those who don't know what that is, explain.
Elseworlds is explained as stories that could or could not have happened in the larger universe of DC on the Infinite Earths. They are Legends and myths.
Midgens. That's what we're going to call legends
you
and
gotta be
myths from
careful
this point
saying
forward.
that.
We're
That
going to
sounds
say
like
midgens.
Legends and myths that have been told throughout the stories and that are from other Earths that we don't know if are true or not. Gotham by Gaslight is in the Elseworld stories.
So it's like What If in Marvel.
Yes, it is. It is What If in Marvel. I mean, we have Superman's speeding bullet, which was basically what if Superman landed in Gotham with the Waynes instead of in Kansas with the Kents. And
the Elseworld storylines are going to continue in the DC Universe films.
Yes.
Because they're going to create like Batman, the Batman series.
Joker, Superman and Lois, all of those are going to be Elseworld stories.
Very cool.
That's cool. But as far as the significance on the DC world, like in comics and things like that, did it change anything in the way that stories were told in the DC Universe? Did it help me understand.
It helped us see more morally complex characters through that, and didn't kind of let us see that these superheroes are not always right, and really showed that they can be human as well. Because as we saw in the DC superpowered documentary, kind of the rise at that point was anti-heroes and Punisher and all of those type of characters, because they were edgy and cool and didn't care and weren't told what to do by anybody and all this stuff, and kind of was fitting into that 90s mindset of what was kind of popular back then. But this really showed that the superheroes that were at that point considered campy and cheesy, and while we had some things like The Dark Knight Returns and Killing Joke and Nightfall by that point, it was still shown as those are these superheroes, but we want to see more of these anti-heroes, these more down-to-earth, grounded, gritty characters
in the gray area.
And this showed that every superhero has that gray area. Every superhero is morally complex and not cheesy and not campy. And there's a lot more to these characters that we didn't know. And so this really was able to show that if the story is told correctly, we really can see how these characters are well thought out and well created and can inspire stories that don't need to be edgy and gritty. They can still have that hopeful superhero tone to them, which this definitely has that hopeful superhero tone, but also the gritty, the kind of the devastating side of what we see with superheroes. This shows that a lot too. It's well balanced.
That's interesting. Let's talk a little bit about the background of this storyline. And I know you guys already mentioned Alex Ross, which is obviously an amazing artist. If you are listening to this and you don't know who Alex Ross is, but you're a nerd culture person, you know Alex Ross. You just don't realize it. His art is everywhere, extremely influential.
His art for Iron Man, I love it.
Spider-Man, everything. He's done so much art for so many people.
Absolutely. Talk a little bit about who Mark Waid and Alex Ross are and kind of what led them to create Kingdom Come.
Well, I'll let Nate kind of take the lead of this, but I did want to say something. We were getting ready for this podcast, and I was kind of changing some clothes and stuff, and I was looking at my wall of comics, right, Iron Man comics, and I saw that one of the issues was written by Mark Waid as the all new, all different Avengers. So I thought that was kind of cool, seeing that in preparation for today's podcast. But Nate, you're probably a little bit more familiar with his works.
Just a little bit. When it comes to Mark Waid, haven't read much of his stuff. I'm currently reading his current series that he's doing for Superman, which first issue was fantastic.
Which one is that?
Superman Last Days of Lex Luthor.
Oh, okay.
It was great, and I can't wait to see where it goes. But not super familiar with what Mark Waid has done, but I know
I think he did a lot of. He was kind of cut his teeth on the Flash.
He did, and he honestly
some Marvel stuff.
He did.
One of his big things, one of his most influential writers for Daredevil. It's kind of Frank Miller than Mark Waid that really set Daredevil into the set of who he is, which I got to read both Frank Miller and Mark Waid's run, but. He also did Superman Birthright, which is going to be used as a starting point and kind of a comic that influences Superman Legacy as well. So this guy is a big deal in the comics world. He's done a lot of stuff that has been super influential in the comics. And not only including what I just mentioned, but he also did Kingdom Come. And Kingdom Come, it can be described in the same breath of influence on comics as Watchmen has. It has been super important for comics.
And they kind of patterned the way that this story was told after the Watchmen comics.
Really?
It was the morally complex superheroes and the kind of what is right and wrong with these superheroes, these gods. What if they're left unchecked? And
have you
what
read
happens
Watchmen?
then? I have not.
Wow.
There's some stuff in there that I still have to kind of, I'm not sure if I want to read.
Okay.
But it's also in Time Magazine's 100 greatest novels of all time.
It's never gone out of print.
It's never gone out of print.
Wow.
It is the most popular and most influential comic of all time, right behind Mouse as well. So
Behind what?
Mouse, which won a Pulitzer.
Yeah.
It is, I mean, comics are super important. People don't give enough credit to how important comics can be on general literature. But this had no small shortage of influence. This also won a total of 5 Eisners and Harveys combined, which are book awards. Eisners are specific awards for comics.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And they have that award ceremony every Comic-Con at San Diego.
Really?
And so, I mean, 5 awards for one series is
That's
huge.
pretty insane.
That is crazy. It is basically unheard of by now.
And it's only a 4-issue series.
Exactly. And so it really showed what comics can be. This comic helped put the medium of comics back on the map. It was like, everybody looks at the 90s and the 80s as like this super important, really popular age of comics because there were so many big issues that came out. You had the death of Superman and the reign of the Supermen, and you had Killing Joke and Dark Knight Returns and Nightfall and, you know, Man Without Fear and Born Again, Daredevil, and so many big series that came out back in the 80s and the 90s.
It was also a tough time, too, for comics.
Exactly. It was a really tough time. Compared to now, it was super tough. Marvel went bankrupt in the 90s. And DC was pretty much close to that point, too. It was a super important time, but nobody was buying comics. And Kingdom Come really put this back on the map as comics being important for the general public to realize. And then, of course, we had comic book movies starting to come up. But with comics, Kingdom Come was the main starting point.
Well, I think it's also important to note, you know, you guys were talking about the dark, gritty nature of comic books in the 90s. And, you know, I think that we've already talked about, as we started talking about what the future of this podcast is going to be and how we're going to do more conversations like this around series. One of the things that we've talked about was potentially sometime in the next 12 to 18 months doing a series on The Dark Knight Returns, right? And the impact of that on comics, the impact of that on Batman, the impact of that on films, you know, all of that, very similar kind of concepts so that we're going to talk about in this series. But Wade and Ross actually wrote this in response to stories like The Dark Knight Returns and the dark grittiness, because they didn't like the direction that those comics were going. They didn't like the Punisher and Lobo and the way Wolverine had become so really, really violent, and The Dark Knight Returns and things like that. They were they wanted to see your superheroes need to be good guys. And that's what this whole story is really centered around, is you've got this retired set of classic superheroes from the Justice League that we all think about with Superman and Wonder Woman and Batman, of course, but the Flash and Green Lantern and these classic, you know, characters that have to come back and try to restore order and honor to the idea of being a superhero, while there's this new breed of metahumans that don't care about the consequences of their actions at all, which was a mirror of what's going on with this. You know, talk a little bit about the some of the other stories maybe that have influenced Wade and Miller, or excuse me, Wade Miller. I thought about Frank Miller for a second. Wade and Ross, as they crafted this story and kind of we're going down the path of planning this out.
Well, I mean, Mark Waid had already written quite a bit for DC, as we had mentioned. You know, especially he cut his teeth on the Flash. You know, and through working on that series, he gained a kind of a reputation for very deep character work. You know, they didn't just have, you know, the kind of Saturday morning cartoon, just flashy characters that were always.
His comics didn't really feel
happy.
like ones you'd find in a gas station. They were more important than
they really looked at a character's personality and morals, which set him apart. So using that, he was able to create a nuanced and kind of character driven level to Kingdom Come. It's not about having, while it does have just about every DC superhero or character you
and
want,
and ones that you don't even hardly get mentioned, right?
It's not a cameo fest.
No.
It's very focused on the characters and their motives and their thoughts behind everything. So, you know, he really set himself up for success through his previous works on that.
Definitely. And with Alex Ross, he worked with Marvel a lot, and he still works with Marvel a lot, more than DC, I'd say, at this point. But he worked on Marvels, which was kind of a groundbreaking series for its photorealistic, hyper-realistic artwork that is Alex Ross's signature at this point. You see a picture of Alex Ross art, you immediately know it's Alex Ross. And every panel he does in a comic could be hung up in a museum. It's amazing artwork. And so he did that with Marvels, and it was super groundbreaking. And so he was brought onto this project and with Mark Waid, and was writing this with him, and wanted to have this artwork, this photorealistic, hyper-realistic, emotional artwork. As I was reading it again today, I noticed that you really do get to see the full emotions on each of the characters, because there's more depth to them than just
you can connect to them a bit
just
easier.
Artwork. Yes, like at the end of the story when the pastor is kind of pleading to Superman to stop. I mean, there's just a couple panels of just focusing on Superman, and you see a tear start to well up. That's something you can't really show as well without this hyper realistic artwork that we have, and it was amazing.
And I think another thing about his style that lends to the story so well is he does a fantastic job of taking classic, what some people would consider cheesy looks of characters,
and making the classic golden age versions of these characters,
and making them feel timeless, like they're icons from years ago, like any Greek god in a way, and something about his style always kind of reminds me of kind of like depictions of like the 40s and 50s, that kind of art style that was prevalent. I don't remember what you would call it, but just kind of that almost like grainy look to it kind of also helps set this story in a way that's almost like timeless. Like you could I didn't realize that this was written in the 90s when I was reading it. You could have told me this came out 2 years ago and I would have believed you. It really helps lend to that.
Yeah. We were talking about it a little bit as far as Whedon and Ross's inspiration for what this was. It was really Ross that came up with the idea while he was working the Marvels series, and how he wanted to do something like that in DC. And again, it was in response to sort of this darker trend within comics and these anti-hero approach towards some of these characters. And he wanted to come back. So he went with Waid, and Waid was really, really passionate about let's get back to true heroes in comics.
Style of heroes.
And so, they work together on this really well. But there's also the biblical concept. Sam, you brought that up a little bit earlier when we were starting on that. Talk a little bit about kind of some of the ideas in the narrative and how they weave the biblical narrative in the story into that.
Right. I mean, well, even just the name of the comic is a biblical reference from
the Lord's Prayer.
Right from the Lord's, thy will be done.
Your kingdom come, your will be done.
Yeah. Sorry. It's a reference. And throughout the story, Revelations is the book that's referenced, but it's not like the story itself mirrors Revelation one for one. It's told from the minister's mindset. I forget his name or his viewpoint, and he's having these prophetic visions of the future, and he's processing these visions through his worldview, what he knows, and that's the Bible, and specifically Revelation, because it's an apocalyptic literature, and what he's seeing are apocalyptic images. And so you'll see just certain scenes in the comic that line up with something from Revelation. Not the whole story, but like when I can't remember a specific reference of one, but I know there's one referring to like Superman rising out of the ashes and things like that. Like there are parts where you're reading it and it kind of feels like everything comes to a head and you're like, oh my gosh, this revelation, this prophecy has come true. So it's more of I'm trying to think of a word, a literary tool.
Yeah, device.
More than anything. Because biblical, the Bible's been referenced in all sorts of things. It adds an almost weighty, epic, mythological feel to a lot of things when the Bible's referenced. And it works perfectly with this story following the myths and gods of DC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nate, earlier you and I were talking a little bit as you were kind of rereading this today about some of that biblical imagery and some of the connections and ties. What were some of the things that you noticed when you were reading it today?
Like talking about Shazam and the seven thunders and all that stuff at that voice, that lion's roar, that's Shazam. That's the seven gods, his seven powers coming into that lightning strike, and the Emerald City, which is talking about Green Lantern and the city that he created up above, and the seven angels, which is the Justice League
that rises back up.
Right, exactly. And all of these things, each issue starts with a reference back to Revelation to kind of as a starting point. And each issue, almost except for the last one, ends with reference back to Revelation. It's a big part of this story, and it starts with the pastor talking about to his friend that had these prophetic visions on his deathbed, him talking about Revelation to him, and
him preaching, delivering a sermon
exactly,
in the opening
about Revelation, and then he starts having these visions, and then Spectre comes to him to help him and kind of bring him through as the witness of these events, and which is such an interesting concept. It was so cool. It feels like a Christmas Carol, but
a little bit,
a lot. But it was such an interesting way to show this pastor and his hope and how it never wavered throughout any of this, and that showed his faith more than anything. It was so awesome.
Even the way that it ends with Shazam. And how the solution for the unwinnable scenario in the story is not having the gods win or humanity win.
It's having the one person that bridges that gap.
The one that's both the God-man with Billy Batson, Shazam, the one that is all God and all man, having to sacrifice himself in order. That might just be the dad moment be coming in the middle here, but sacrificing himself in order to save all of the earth with that is a really, really powerful metaphor. And Superman has very messianic, Christological ideas within this, but I think that was a really interesting.
Christological?
Yeah, that's a word.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I learned something today.
Yeah, there we go. So let's talk a little bit about these, the way that they envision some of these classic DC characters with it. You've got your main characters that you think about. We've Superman, Batman, and all of those. Talk a little bit about some of the different characters.
Talk about one.
I thought
go
for it.
Flash was super cool in this story.
Talk a little bit about that.
Well, in a way, they kind of took each of these classic characters and brought them to their greatest potential, in a way. Superman was at his strongest. Wonder Woman, physically they were all at their strongest. Obviously, morally, they were a little
ambiguous.
They were a little messed up at this point because they were jaded. But physically, as superheroes, they were at their greatest. Flash. Well, he was constantly patrolling Keystone City at all times, right? And he was like, every depiction of him, he was like phasing in and out of different realities and stuff. At one point, he's able to see the Spectre and
the pastor and pulls him out of that.
Yeah, I just thought that was such a cool depiction of the Flash. They took that kind of campy look with the hubcap and then made him like just an ethereal entity that you can't even notice. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, talk a little about some of the other characters. Yeah. Go with Batman because Batman's a really fun character.
Batman is a good character in this. Batman is the one character that really feels like he hasn't changed morally. He is still Batman. He still believes in what he's doing and will still be the cunning detective that he always is, and will double cross Lex Luthor at a drop of a hat because that's what he wanted to do, and that's what he found to be the best. And he does patrol Gotham in a different way, but people might be like, it's a police state. He's consistently, but he does it in such a way where he only acts if there is a crime and then acts on that, but still doesn't compromise his morals. And Gotham is an insanely safe city now because of what Batman has done, even though he's not out there himself. But it really shows that Batman hasn't compromised his morals even with these new group of superheroes coming up. And with Superman. Now,
Before you move on, I have one question about Batman. It's not a serious question. It's just it always bugged me when I was reading it. When he's not in the full bat suit, he's just kind of wear the exosuit thing. The bottom half of his neck guard looks like Darth Vader's helmet. Like when he takes off the helmet at the end of episode 6, it looks just like that. And I'm not crazy, right?
No, you're not.
Okay, I just wanted to clear that up.
You're good. No, but Superman, it was super interesting to reread this because I've read the Injustice comics and played the Injustice game and everything. And this follows a very similar story, but Superman took a different direction.
Oh, yeah.
In Injustice, Joker kills Lois Lane.
Right.
And in this, Joker kills Lois Lane. But in this, Joker is killed not by Superman, but
and just so you know, if you haven't read this comic, that's like the opening. It's not like that big of a spoiler. That's what starts the story.
This is explained in like a backstory.
Right. It's like Magog kills Joker.
That's another biblical reference.
Yes, it is. Literally in the name from Revelation.
Which I loved. I watched a video kind of talking about how Alex Ross came up with the character design for that. And he's like, yeah, I just took all the parts about Rob Liefeld's character design that I didn't like and combined it. Which, if you know Rob Liefeld, he's definitely done some influential work, but he's also very infamous as to some of his depictions of characters. So I thought that was pretty funny.
So what I really loved about this story was showing how the Boy Scout of Superman doesn't really change. And that's something that people were a little bit confused about and frustrated about. And it is something that frustrated me in Injustice, how much Superman lost it when Lois Lane died. And in this one, Superman still keeps level head and retires after this because he doesn't want to be a part of the human world anymore. He wants to go to a digital farm and live life the way he wants to live life.
Pulling a
and
giant
plow. And just forget about everything that happens in the real world and go into some solitude. And in Injustice, he goes the complete opposite direction. He becomes one of these young heroes that decides to enact vengeance and justice that he sees fit on the general public, which was super interesting. And I do wonder how Mark Waid and Alex Ross felt about that take on basically
the Injustice version.
The Injustice version of Superman, because it was way after. But I really loved how Superman was shown in this story as still being this incorruptible Boy Scout, because that's who Superman is. And that is also something that people haven't liked about Man of Steel and Zack Snyder's version of Superman, because he killed Zod, and that's not what Superman's supposed to do.
But he did it to save humanity.
He did it to save humanity, and that's when he became a human again. That's when Superman became the Man of Steel, not Kal-El. And that was a really great moment. And it happened in Superman Christopher Reeve's version too. Zod died in that one, but nobody seems to care about that.
Well, when you see
either.
the other version, there's an alternate version where they show that he survived.
Exactly. Yeah. So it depends on which version you think of, but still, it happened back then.
Well, I think it's interesting. When I think about this version of Superman, this is the first time we see the grizzled, jaded, cynical, retired, removed from the story, old hero. This is the Logan story. This is the Indiana Jones in Dial of Destiny who's moved. This is Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi.
He acts very much like Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi in this.
Yeah.
Very
he
much
goes
so.
off to seclude himself after things don't quite go how he expects. I mean,
which I loved that, because you know how much I love that. I think isn't this the first time we see Wonder Woman really brought into the storyline as like the Trinity in this? I mean, was she elevated to that
was
level?
Pretty popular in the 90s, but I don't know if she was elevated to this much of an influential character in
she was pretty
this
important.
story. But she was also kind of the most morally ambiguous in this story.
Yeah,
she was pretty brutal and kind of lost it at some points. And
she kind of transitions through the story from on Kal-El's side opening to kind of shifting over to just the other side of the
Lex
division
Luthor kind of stuff. Yeah, like just get rid of these heroes kind of ideology, which is not what Superman wanted. It's not what Batman wanted. And that's why Superman and Batman eventually worked together at the end. But Wonder Woman kind of lost her way after this. And not the first time we've seen it. She's basically the same character in Injustice as she is in this.
Really?
Basically shot for shot, Wonder Woman starts to lose faith in humanity and tries to convince Clark to join her and kind of rise up against these people. So that's very similar who she is in this story. But in this story, she still has a compass of morality and still wants to really do right by the world, but she's not sure how to anymore because she's lost so much in the 10 years that between, where Joker kills Lois Lane and Kal-El goes to exile and lost so much. So it's interesting to see how that's factored into her character.
Let's talk a little bit about like the environment. This is something you guys obviously weren't a part of, but the world and the setting of this, when I think of the origin of Star Wars, for example, Star Wars is the product of a series of movies in the 70s that were dark, they were gritty, they were angry, they were violent, and an environment, a world culture that was jaded and cynical and needed some type of hope. And that's very similar to the setting that births this Kingdom Come graphic novel, both in the way comics are being told, being dark and gritty, but also the culture and the world at that time. I mean, you guys are obviously unaware of that, but if it's dads and moms and old people like me on here listening to this, the 90s, we're just coming out of the Cold War. We're just kind of getting into this new world with lots of globalization, lots of, the internet is starting to be born and take place. And it's this, we've got this. The racial tensions are coming back to the surface with police brutality, coming with like the Rodney King situation in South Central LA and the riots that took place based on that, and just a lot of disillusionment with the public space, the politics and fears in the future on that, and that bleeds into what Wade and Ross are telling in this story, because there is this, is there something to be hopeful for? Can good actually win? Is there any hope for humanity and for the future on that? What are your thoughts on some of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, and comics usually try to reflect the world that we're in today, and then sometimes they are a way to escape from the cruelty of the world. But it was done in telling a way of hope and not really bleeding in the real world into this. It was just there to show hope and kind of give people this outlet of escapism while still giving them a reason to kind of work on this.
Yeah, I think it captured the feeling the general public had very well without straight up, bringing up real world topics. It had that sense of unease and uncertainty, but a possible hope for the future without actually, quoting the Cold War or anything like that.
Right. It wasn't Dark Knight Returns, The Golden Child.
Explain for those of us that don't know what that is.
It was the most recent sequel to Dark Knight Returns, which any sequel to Dark Knight Returns has been mediocre at best, which is sad. But this one was especially bad. It was genuinely bringing in real world events with Trump in the 2016 election,
really?
And having that being the basis of the villain throughout the entire the issue. And I was like, this is just, you're bringing in too much of the real world for this to be
an escape.
Yeah. For this to be it's too heavy-handed.
Yeah, I was going to say
you're trying to get a message across, and you can do it in a different way without it being so heavy-handed.
See, when that happens, it just takes me out of the story.
Exactly, it took me out of the story, and it's one of my least favorite.
Well, it kind of reminds me of when we talked about the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and when they were dealing with some real-world issues, right? The experimentation on African American soldiers during World War II and post World War II, and racism and globalization and immigrant issues and refugee issues and all of these different types of things. But they did it in a way that it allowed us to experience that world and those issues without having to hear it being preached, which opens up an opportunity to have a conversation about it, which is, I think, what you say you like about this story.
It's
versus
what I love about this story. It's what I love about most stories that tell these kind of versions of real world events.
That's how it should be done.
It allows you to think more about it after the fact, not have it kind of thrown up on you while you're reading it. And it's more important to kind of have that set with you rather than you just being like, okay, well, this is just, I feel like I'm reading a newspaper with illustrations rather than a comic book that is supposed to have superheroes and really big moments to it. It didn't feel like that. And this is what this did. This had the big moments. This had the ability for you to think on it afterwards. As we're doing now, we're taking 8 episodes of a podcast to talk about everything that this series did.
A comic book series that came out almost 30 years ago.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
You couldn't do that with some of the stuff that like you couldn't do that with The Dark Knight Returns, Golden Child. There's no feasible way you could have 8 episodes talking about that. And while it is shorter, there's just nothing you could pull out of that you couldn't fit into one episode. But there's so much hidden in this series that's important.
Yeah, and I think one thing that is not really it's not hidden at all. It's sort of front and center. It's a primary element of this is this divide between the classic generation of superheroes and this new generation,
which follows today pretty well.
Well, it follows every generation, right? I mean, that's like the issue, and I think it's important for us to, and we'll look at this in an episode later. We're going to go into detail on it, but it's going to take up an entire episode. I mean, this is a multi-generational podcast, so it should do that. But talk a little bit about maybe the new heroes and that generational conflict in this.
Yeah, there was a lot to it, and it was really interesting to see because the new heroes, which we see today, even in comics, new heroes are more violent, less reserved, less morally right in a lot of things. I mean, you look at one character for that as reference. You look at Damian Wayne and his ideology against what should be done against these supervillains, and he started to become more like Batman. But he's young.
Now, isn't that more the result of his training and his upbringing
and everything? Okay. But still, he has this ideology that heroes need to be different, and a lot of that happens in this story. Heroes believe that they need to be different. They need to enact an instant judgment on these villains.
See, one thing, I don't have as much exposure or experience with this character as you might, Nate, but one thing, at least in the Gotham Knights game, that I like about Red Hood is he kind of comes from that mindset of Damian Wayne where judgment needs, he was totally fine with killing, like judgment needed to be enacted to begin with. And then when he was readopted into the Bat family, he struggled with adopting Bruce Wayne's mentality to justice, and it took him a while to adjust to that, but eventually he learned why that was the way things needed to happen, and he went backwards. He learned the true form of justice that these old heroes in Kingdom Come were trying to enact that the new generation can quite understand. He kind of bridges that gap in a way, which is something I find really interesting about that character. Am I kind of on the right track?
Yeah, you are.
Nate?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think another thing that's really fascinating to me is the positive portrayal of Norman McKay as a religious leader, as a pastor, not a religious denominational leader. He's not a pope. He's not a televangelist. He's not. He's not a famous pastor or anything like that. He's a small town, little church.
in the first panel we see him preaching, and there's maybe 30 people in his congregation, but he talks to Spectre. He's like, I can't go. My congregation still needs me. That's 30 people.
I love how they portray that.
He's not a zealot. He's not a
he's a shepherd.
Cultist. He is a priest. He's
a pastor.
He's a pastor, and that's all he wants to do is just be there for the congregation,
no matter,
and mentor them and minister to them. That's it.
But he's the one that truly
saved the world,
saves the day.
Yeah,
is this religious small
everyday
church
guy.
Everyday pastor that's just trying to care for his own flock, his own people, trying to maintain hope in a world that has become more and more hopeless, trying to pass on hope to people who desperately need it. He's the one that ends up at the end of this persuading Superman at the very end to be human again.
And I think you can respect that character and that regardless of your religious stance or affiliation. He's just such a down-to-earth, everyday person, and it makes for a really interesting story that way.
Yeah. Let's talk a little good. Kind of as we begin to wrap up here in this episode. What was the initial, based on what you guys understand, what was the initial reaction, both critically and by fans, to the release of Kingdom Come?
It was positive, immensely positive, because it was something new. And while it doesn't seem like it would be something new, we're taking characters that are old, we're taking characters that at that point were campy, and just giving the hopeful superhero story again. People understood that when it comes to comic books, we truly need that. And this was the first time in a while we had that hopeful story told in such a beautiful and amazing way that people just, you couldn't miss it. If you were alive in 1996 and you followed comics, you could not miss the Kingdom Come miniseries. It wasn't something you could do. And so it was shown by critics and by fans and by comic stores running out of these issues and having to have multiple printings of these issues that this series was important, and everyone just thought it was amazing. I have not met someone that has read this series that says that it's okay. Everyone's like, this is an amazing series, and absolutely was influential on the comics we have today.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the serialized comics that are prevalent. While there's nothing wrong with those in any way, in fact, I've started kind of getting into them a little bit. They're great fun, and they can have interesting stories. Something about a story where they give a small team of creators complete liberty to tell the story that they feel needs to be told. Not that they would necessarily want to tell. I mean, they did want to tell it, but something that they felt was important to tell with their own freedom to tell allows them the room to tell an influential story. You're not bogged down with ties to the canon or having to fit into short, 30-page issues or anything.
Yeah.
It allowed them to tell the story that resonated with fans at the time, because it was also such a standout story amongst all of the grim, dark stories that were prevalent at the time.
And it really shows against the people, that people are like, oh, I hate the multiverse. It's ruining comics. If we didn't have the multiverse, we wouldn't have had this story. Right. We wouldn't have Elseworlds. We would not have Kingdom Come. We wouldn't have Watchmen. These things would not exist without the creation of the multiversal introduction into comics, with the Flash, with the Flash of Two Worlds, that insanely classic comic cover. That was the beginning of these stories, the ability to tell these stories. Crisis on Infinite Earths was told from a multiverse perspective. The multiverse isn't bad if it's used correctly and not in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness.
You're going to throw that dig in every opportunity
every
you
time.
have.
Every time.
You talk about the impact of that the Flash. What was the name of that one you mentioned?
The Flash of Two Worlds.
The Flash of Two Worlds had on creating the multiverse and how it changed things.
Everything. Yeah.
With that, which then allows for Kingdom Come and stories like it to take place. But what are some of the things that Kingdom Come brought to the table that have had a lasting impact on the DC universe? I know we kind of talked about this at the beginning, but specifically, what are some of those things?
Yeah, it really helped show that there can be deep stories of these superheroes that we love, and that these superheroes that we love, we can connect with them more if we show that they have human emotion. You can connect with these characters more if we see them beaten, if we see them have a fit of rage, if we see them morally broken at these points, we can connect with them more. And that's allowed us to have these amazing storylines that we've had today with a lot of comics now, with Chip Zdarsky's Daredevil run, and with Chip Zdarsky's Batman run, and with so many comics, like even the I Am Iron Man series that you've been reading, Sam. Each issue itself tells a story of how Iron Man can be broken and how he comes back from that, at least from what I've read of it. And so every comic now shows that these characters are pretty much us, and that's what makes them heroes, instead of them being these insane superheroes that we can never, these people we could never relate to, we now can relate to. And this series really helped say that. Also helped with making sure that comics don't need to have so art. They really can have beautiful art to it and still be on time.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you?
I'm not sure there's really much I can add to that. Nathan really summed up everything I would think about that series.
So, as we get ready to move forward into other episodes regarding this, and we start talking about characters, and we talk about the artists, and we talk about the impact, and we talk about those types of things, I think that one of the things that I'm walking away from this initial conversation with is that in the midst of a crazy, challenging world environment that's being illustrated through, because art illustrates life, right? With that,
art imitates life.
Art imitates life, right? So these comics that were coming out in the 90s were dark, cynical, gritty, anti-hero stories that were looking for justice, and regardless of how you got it, which was reflecting what so many people were feeling at that time. We're in that same time right now.
Yeah.
We feel, so many people feel that way in our world today. And, I think it kind of connects to something I want to share as a dad moment.
I am your father.
Hope isn't found in vengeance. And I think that that's what you see the battle of this story taking place.
That's the plot of the Batman movie.
Right. That movie's good.
but that's the idea, right? So you've got this world that's looking for justice, and they see that mistakenly see this as being vengeance and destruction. And I mean, we're locking up superheroes in a mega prison in this because we can't control them, but then at the same time they're battling it out, and collateral damage is happening everywhere, and these heroes don't care, and there is no hope. And so Superman comes in and tries to impose order on the situation with the Justice League all over again, and that doesn't work. And the answer isn't any of those things. The answer in this is a simple man, a human, a pastor who brings hope and brings a message of hope, even to somebody that should probably not listen to him. And I think that that's how we move forward in our lives and in our world, right? If you can bring hope to the people in your circle of influence, whether or not that's a Superman in this comic book, where finally he gets a chance to speak to him and he brings a message of hope to him, or and humanity, right, to him, or if it's a pastor and his little congregation of 30 people and he's sharing that message of hope, whatever your world and your circle is, just be the type of person when someone spends 10 minutes or 2 hours with, or is around all the time, they walk away and they feel hopeful because they've been around you. I think that's probably the message that Wade and Ross were trying to get past with this, was that we need to be people of hope.
Yes.
And I think that that's what we're going to see throughout the rest of this. So I'm very excited to see where this goes.
Series.
Yeah.
With this, what are some of the takeaways that you guys had from our conversation, the exploration and of the origins of this?
Oh, I mean, it feels like I want something like this to come out nowadays, but in other ways, we don't need something to come out nowadays because this story can still apply even now in this crazy world like you were mentioning. So I'm excited to take a deeper dive into that.
It just reminds me that comics are really good. We can have really great comics that really speak to people if they're done right. And yeah, this one really did a great job with that.
I do think it's interesting, though, that when you talk about how we don't need these stories told again, we so do.
Well, I'm saying like we don't need,
because this one exists.
Right.
I think it's interesting that Wade and Ross say that you couldn't write this story today. They've said recently in interviews.
Yeah.
They're like, no, we couldn't. No, not from no one would allow it to be written, but like, no, that it would have to be a different story with different characters and different concepts because they don't think that it translates into today. But from a next generation perspective, you guys both feel like it translates perfectly into today.
Exactly. It's a timeless comic.
It really is, in my opinion.
I think that's pretty amazing. What are we going to talk about the next time?
Well, I think we're going to talk about the narrative. We're going to dive deep into the plot of the story. We're kind of taking a surface level, 30,000 foot view here. We're going to talk about its complexities and its kind of its progression and the way it navigates through the various DC characters' arcs. There's a lot of characters it's got to weave through.
It's like some of the
while still focusing.
biggest amount of characters in a DC comic I've seen.
And it'll also be a bit of an analysis on like the storytelling methods that they utilize.
And
like we were
of
mentioning
course,
with Revelation.
Planet Krypton. We can't forget.
We cannot skip.
I really want a Planet Krypton play.
Green Arrow, Green Lantern. Who am I?
Who am I? I really want a Planet Krypton in the real world. I would go to that in a heartbeat.
That's awesome. Well, that's it. That's going to do it for an episode. It was a longer episode, but it was fun. It was a good conversation.
Kingdom Come deserves a lot of going
to spend another 7 episodes doing this.
For 30 years it's been talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. Almost 30 years. Yeah, absolutely. How can listeners share their thoughts and feedback on this episode? What are some ways they can get in touch with us?
You can leave us reviews, for one, on Google and Spotify or Apple Podcasts, all those little things. But you can also, message us or whatever on our social medias. Like
they can X us on X.
I don't like that. Twitter.
On Twitter.
It's Twitter. You could follow us on Twitter.
Feel free to express yourself.
Okay, that was pretty good. Yeah. That one was good. You need to hit up Elon.
I told Elon that. He didn't listen. So
we're on Facebook as well. That's still Facebook. It's always been Facebook, believe it or not.
No, it's Meta. It's Meta now.
No, it's the app is still Facebook until they do the weird loop.
And you can find us on Threads. I'll see the notification and respond. Same, but it's always at Tatooine Sons. Yeah, and SONS with that. And I think that's gonna. Make sure you check out the CNHQ, the Christian Nerd HQ, with all the different shows on that. Mondays is Christian Nerds Unite. We're Tuesdays. Wednesdays are Fangirling Over Jesus. Thursdays are The Reverend and the Reprobate, and Fridays are Speaking Nerdy. Check out all the shows. The links are in the notes below. We'd love for you to check those out and share this with people. Make sure if you've got DC fans or comic book fans in your life that they get in on this series. We'd love to allow them to hear this show and engage with us over a long haul.
Kingdom Come.
And if you haven't read Kingdom Come, go buy it.
Please do buy it.
It's worth it.
Yeah. It's everywhere. You can find it basically anywhere.
You can probably find it at Barnes & Noble.
You definitely could find it at
Books
Barnes
A Million.
Yep, for sure. Yeah. Amazon, anywhere you want to read it, it's there.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's going to do it for this week. Anything else you guys want to say?
May the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you, always.
This party's over.
I like that Wookiee.
Don't get technical with me.
Join, please.